In my video about gray morality and gritty realism, I got a ton of comments that didn't seem to understand the distinction between morally gray and morally complex, often conflating gray morality with moral complexity.
I said, do we have a problem? Huh? Oh, U-S-U-S-R. Let's go! Oh, come on now!
So I figured I might as well break these two concepts down to provide some clarity, give some actionable advice, and, I don't know, set the record straight, I guess, because it seems like people really don't understand what morally gray means. So to start, what is gray morality? Well, gray morality refers to the approach where characters, factions, or situations are morally ambiguous rather than clearly defined good or evil. In essence, it is about the absence of clear moral distinctions. Gray morality focuses on ambiguity, blurring the lines between right and wrong, most often by presenting morally ambiguous characters or scenarios. Character choices in these situations rarely feel good or evil, and this often creates an atmosphere where moral clarity feels extremely elusive. This tends to lend itself to a sense of nihilism or cynicism, where the lack of clear moral distinctions makes every choice feel equally flawed or, in its extreme, pointless. Moral complexity, however, enriches games by acknowledging that clear choices can have difficult, far-reaching consequences. Moral complexity focuses on the nuance and presents choices with layers and trade-offs, challenging the players to balance conflicting values or outcomes. Unlike gray morality, moral complexity doesn't inherently obscure moral clarity. Instead, it highlights that making the right choice can still involve sacrifices or unintended consequences. This complexity allows players to explore different values while facing the weight of their decisions. They tend to intersect when morally complex scenarios create ambiguous outcomes, but moral complexity usually offers a clearer sense of purpose, allowing for greater engagement and satisfaction in the decisions made. Despite their overlap at times, these things aren't interchangeable. People toss gray morality around so often when what they really mean is moral complexity. They also have a completely separate impact on player experience. Gray morality, as I said before, tends to lend itself to nihilism, cynicism, and moral fatigue. You make choices in a world where everyone's a bit tainted, so after a while it can feel like nothing matters. The more gray everything is, the less consequence your choices seem to have, and if every decision is doomed to compromise or disappointment, the players are going to start to feel like they're just treading water in a swamp. On the other hand, moral complexity offers meaningful dilemmas with real stakes. It's not that you're forced to choose between bad and worse, but that each choice has upsides and sacrifices. It respects the player's intelligence enough to give them ethical depth without robbing them of purpose. It's not about making the players feel like their choices are pointless, but about making their choices count and matter for something, even when the right path isn't easy.
Godfather, I don't know what to do.
You can act like a man! What's the matter with you? Is this how you turned out a Hollywood Pinocchio that cries like a woman? What can I do?
Let me give you an example using these two concepts to paint a clearer picture. Let's say your party is in a city gripped by famine and they've been asked to secure food supplies from a nearby village. So, in gray morality, oftentimes it'll be the case that everybody involved is unpleasant and completely self-serving. So, let's say that the city's leader is a corrupt food hoarder that is ensuring what little food the city does have is secured enough only so that his own position is kept secure. He lets the poorest of the citizens starve. However, he does hire the party to secure more food for the greater good, but his real motivation is to keep most of it for himself. Opposite to him is the village leader. This village leader doesn't trust outsiders and plans to defend what supplies they have by force, even though they have plenty of surplus they could spare without any harm at all. They're paranoid, and he won't listen to reason, believing that sharing any food at all will make his people vulnerable. In the end, regardless of what the party does, they're effectively just enabling one selfish, morally dubious leader over the other. The right choice here is smudged beyond distinction, and they're just picking between morally bankrupt options. This same scenario, as a morally complex one, would look much different, and so would the characters involved. The city leader, instead, is just genuinely struggling to keep order, sometimes using harsh but necessary measures to keep the city from collapsing altogether. He's not perfect. He often makes tough choices that do hurt some citizens to save others, like rationing food strictly for the workforce. But it is made clear he is trying to do his absolute best in a terrible scenario to prevent chaos and destruction. The village leader would now have a genuine reason for wanting to keep the food. The village is barely holding on to their own rations and are extremely limited. While not immediately devastating, sharing would put the village people at risk. However, he is compassionate and is open to compromise with the city folk, even though it may cost his village their future security. Now you have tough decisions to make, and potential ways to work it out so that you aren't left with a total wash of negative outcomes. In the morally complex scenario, the choices are still difficult, but they're not meaningless. Every option has consequences, but players can see the reasoning and humanity behind each leader's decisions. They can feel the weight of their choice without feeling like it's all bleak. The key differences here are that gray morality presents a world where all choices are tainted and the players are forced into picking the lesser evil in a system that feels fundamentally broken. Whereas moral complexity offers a world where ethical decisions are hard but still carry meaning and impact. So I guess last thing to talk about is why I think people have confused these two concepts. There's a number of reasons for sure. They both deal with ethical dilemmas and involve characters or factions that aren't purely good or evil. On the surface, they seem like they occupy similar spaces, but the distinction between them is critical. For one, I think gray morality is just simpler, right? It's easier to throw in morally dubious characters with shady motives and call it all complex. The villain or the heroes aren't clearly defined, and you've got a lot of moral ambiguity on the decisions that they make. It takes a lot less effort to make every character or faction corrupt and self-serving than it does to flesh out a scenario with genuine nuance between them. And because it's so prevalent, it's become the go-to shorthand for complexity in a lot of media. I ragged on Game of Thrones a bit, but if I'm being fair, there are moments of moral complexity within it. There's just a lot of gray morality too, and that's where I think a lot of people have become confused. Over time, people mistake the overuse of this style for the definition of complexity itself, assuming anything that is morally ambiguous must mean complex or deep. Moral complexity relies on creative, genuine stakes, with layered motivations and consequences that resonate with people. However, to an outside viewer, balanced choices may look ambiguous even if they're not. When you have two factions, each with their own very compelling reasons to exist, it can seem like an intentionally gray setup when in reality, it's just balanced to keep the players considering every option. Gray morality also, as I stated in the other video, has a certain gritty appeal. It's the edgier approach that people often think makes a story or game feel mature. It's become associated with depth because of its popularity in genres that prioritize a more grimdark aesthetic, like gritty fantasy or dystopian sci-fi. Many players and dungeon masters see moral ambiguity and think that it makes a game inherently complex or mature, overlooking that genuine depth requires more than just ambiguity. You need stakes, thoughtful motivations, and carefully structured dilemmas, all hallmarks of moral complexity, not gray morality. And last, honestly, it's just laziness. People use these terms interchangeably because they haven't sat down to think through the distinction between them. It's easy and simple to just lump all morally challenging elements into a single pot and call it a day. These two things occupy a similar space within our minds, so without much thought, they get conflated for each other. To sum it up, gray morality is the simplistic shorthand that tries to imply complexity by erasing clear ethics, while moral complexity is a bit more sophisticated in structure and where choices actually carry weight. I think, or at least I hope with this video, that once people recognize the difference, they'll see just how thin gray morality can be compared to the richness of moral complexity. So that's it. How do you all feel about this? And how do you see it in your tabletop games? Let me know in the comments. Either way, thank you for watching. I am Churro, and I hope you enjoyed.